Have you ever been in a drag race?
Are you kidding me?
I just thought I'd ask. No, gym races in the tradition, you might say. Real racing cars, real tracks. How fast will your car go?
Oh, an honest miles an hour. Clocked, it'd run about 106, 7.
We probably have a great many young people watching our show tonight, and for their benefit, I'd like your opinion about fast driving on the highway. Do you think it's a good idea?
A good point. I used to fly around quite a bit, you know. I took a lot of unnecessary chances on the highways. And I started racing, and now I drive on the highways. I'm extra cautious, because no one knows what they're doing. Half the time, you don't know what this guy's going to do with that one. On a track, there are a lot of men who spend a lot of time developing rules and ways of safety. And I find myself being very cautious on the highway. I don't have the urge to speed on the highway.
One more question. Do you have any special advice for the young people who drive?
Take it easy driving. The life you might save might be mine. You know?
Hollywood has changed quite a bit since 1955. Back in those days, this building to the right was the site of Competition Motors. Competition was a Porsche dealership that catered to the high-end racing enthusiast. One of those racers was 24-year-old Hollywood actor James Dean. Dean was not allowed to race while he was making movies, but several days earlier he had finished the filming of his third and what would turn out to be his final film role in Giant. He also recently had signed a big Hollywood contract which left him flush with cash, so he came over here to Competition and purchased his own race car, a Porsche 550 Spyder, which was one of only about 70 that were ever made. On September 30th, 1955, which was a Friday, Dean brought the Spyder over here from his home in Sherman Oaks. He brought it here to be tuned up for a race that he'd entered later that weekend in Salinas, California. The Porsche, which was nicknamed the Little Bastard, was a temperamental beast, and it took mechanic Rolf Wiederick several hours to tune up to Dean's specifications. Around noon, the car was ready. Dean wanted to make it to Salinas by nightfall. The time trials were going to be the next day, and the big race was going to be on Sunday. Just before leaving, Dean was photographed sitting behind the wheel with his fists in the air, confidently vowing to win the race. From here, Dean and Wiederick would travel up to Ventura Boulevard. They went west on Ventura and stopped briefly to get gasoline, another famous photograph. About a half an hour later, they would have been in the Santa Clarita Valley. The question is, did they stop there? Well, many people believe that they did. The story goes that he exited at the Saugus Road turnoff, now known as Magic Mountain Parkway, and pulled into a Tip's Diner for a quick lunch. We may never know for certain if this actually happened, but we do know what happened next. Dean's little convoy was barreling down the far side of the Grapevine when he stopped again, even though he hadn't planned to.
I was going south on Highway 99 and I noticed this little Porsche Spyder going north, and he was going too fast, I could tell that. So there was behind him a pickup truck pulling a trailer, and they were running together. I could tell the way that they were maintaining the distance between them. They were traveling together. So I made a U-turn. At that time, this wasn't a freeway, just a 4-lane highway. So I made a U-turn and dropped in behind them and clocked them, and they were doing around 70 miles an hour. And so I pulled both of them over, and both of them got out, and we discussed why I had stopped them. I told them why I had stopped them, and they didn't have any argument because it was obvious that they were running a little quick. So I rode them, and we sort of chatted a little bit while I was riding. He didn't, nothing at all that was, he didn't seem to be too unhappy, and of course he wasn't all pleasant either. Nobody likes to get a citation. But he certainly didn't act religious or anything like that. He was very pleasant. The other guy was too. It was some friend of his that was driving the pickup, and I don't recall his name. And he was driving a trailer, pulling a trailer that should have had the car on it, the race car. But they were delayed in getting the car over, and they'd only got it over the day before, and he didn't have a chance to break it in. So instead of trailering it up to the races at Monterey, he was going to drive it up there and break it in on the way up. And that's what he was doing, is actually pushing it too much, really.
Now, I understand that you clocked him at roughly 70, right?
Around 70, yeah.
But I think the ticket says 65.
I think that's what I wrote him for. But that's not unusual. You always, if the guy's that far over, why, you can always drop 5 miles off of it, and you know that you're going 65 or better, because if you got a good clock on him around 70, well, you know what he's doing. And so it's not unusual at all.
Do you remember what James Dean said specifically when you ticketed him?
No, not particularly. I didn't know who he was at the time. He was just another guy that I stopped for speeding. And we chatted a little bit, and I asked him where he was going with the car, and he talked about, I'd heard about the race. It's going to be at Monterey, Fort Ord or something in that area. And so we talked about the race and so forth, and he told me about the car getting in late, that he was going to go out to Riverside, and he was going to take about a week or so and go out there and run it and get it loosened up good and get to where it felt comfortable driving it. And unfortunately, it just got in the day before, and so he didn't even have a chance to get it on the racetrack. So it's really too bad that he didn't do that, and if he'd have taken it up there at Riverside like he planned, he probably wouldn't have been speeding up here. So it's very just an unfortunate circumstance, unfortunately, yeah.
So you just gave him the clipboard and signed it, and so you got that autograph of James Dean there?
Oh, yeah.
Now, I've seen a picture of that, and they call it I think the last autograph or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Now, do you have any copies of those?
I had one, but I must have lost it. I tried to find it here a while back, and I couldn't. It's probably a pile of my junk that get bigger in the office all the time, you know. But I see it around a lot. A lot of restaurants have them on the wall and have a picture, and they'll have a picture of the ticket right along with it.
What was he wearing at the time? Do you remember?
Oh, a typical Hollywood dress. He had an old pair of dirty, beat-up, worn-out jeans, no belt on them. They used the Hollywood bunch then. They used a rope where the belt should be on their pants. And he had shoes that were open and didn't have any laces in his shoe sole in his shoes. But that was typical Hollywood dress at that time. But when I saw him, I thought, well, this guy's got to be from Hollywood. But a lot of guys run around with their shoes on, but no shoelaces. And like I say, they didn't wear a belt, but they'd put a rope around their belt loops and then tie the rope in front to keep their pants up.
Well, do you think you could have done something more to convince him to slow down?
I sort of doubt it. I advised him or told him that that was too fast to be running on the highway, and that he should slow down. I remember telling him to slow down and save your speed for the race up there, and wished him good luck in the race. And that was about it, but we didn't get anything technical, and he certainly wasn't in belligerent or anything like that. He was just a very nice talking guy.
After Dean made his unscheduled stop at the bottom of the Grapevine, he headed on north on Route 99 and then west on 46. He made one final stop here at Blackwell's Corner. There were a lot of drivers going by on the 46 going to the same race. He recognized some of them. He stopped here, he chatted with a few. He also chatted briefly with a young boy who liked the Porsche and talked to Dean about it. He drank a Coke. Another person in his party had an apple. Then Rolf Wiederick got in, shotgun. Dean got behind the wheel. And for the next 30 minutes, in the final 30 minutes of Dean's life, they spent it inside the Spider.
Well, it was the evening of September 30th, and Ron and I had just reported for duty at the Paso Robles Police Department. We had no CHP office at the time, and we were working the 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift. And approximately 10 minutes to 6, a phone call came in from Paul Marino, the owner-operator of the Shalam Garage, Tow Service, and Ambulance and Cafe, saying he'd had report of a bad accident at the intersection of 41 and 466, which is now 46. I jumped into, told Ron, he was outside there.
And I said, I don't have anything to do, I'll just follow you out there and assist you.
He went to his car and I jumped in mine, and we headed for the accident scene
We were probably doing 100 miles an hour
where we could.
to get there.
So you came separately, so you got to the crash site first, right? How far behind were you?
Right behind.
Right behind him, okay. And what did you see when you got to the crash site?
Well, I saw a couple of cars smashed up. First thing I did was put out the flares, and Ernie started talking to the people that around there to get some information. The only one I talked to was Turnipseed, Donald Turnipseed, and then I secured the scene so that nobody would run into us, and then started taking pictures.
How was Donald Turnipseed, the driver of the other car? How was it? What shape was he in?
He seemed to be all right there. I think he hit his head on the windshield there. I'm not positive now.
Yeah, he had
but
minor cuts and abrasions, but
he
he
was-
was ambulatory and
Yeah.
got along all right. He didn't go in for the ambulance. James Dean was just, they were taking him from his car, getting him into the ambulance. He was still alive, but didn't look very promising because I thought he had a broken neck. And the other occupant of the car, the passenger, a mechanic from the Porsche factory in Germany, Rolf Dietrich by name, had been thrown from the car, and then he was transported, put in the ambulance, and they both headed for the Paso Robles Hospital.
So when you arrived, Dean was still alive.
Yes. He wasn't very alive, but he was still alive.
Can you describe what he looked like at the time?
I didn't see him, but I heard him. I could tell that it's very possible that he had brain damage because the way he breathed real heavy.
Mom, a kid was killed tonight.
This is all going too fast
You
for
better
me,
give
son.
me something. You better give me something fast.
Jimmy, you're very young. A foolish decision now could wreck your whole life.
So now, at the time you both arrived, approximately how long after the crash did you arrive, do you think?
Well, after the crash, I don't know because it took a little while for people from the crash to go to Marino and stop. And so I would say we got there, half hour probably after the crash. It was shortly after, sometime after 6 o'clock.
Okay, so it was still daylight.
Oh, yes. But it was getting towards dusk.
Okay, so you have Turnipseed coming one way, and he's going to exit to the north there on the 41.
Make a left turn on 41.
A left turn on the
yes.
41.
Go
and you have,
east.
And then you have Dean coming from the other direction. When you said there were other witnesses, what did they tell you about how it all came about?
Well, Dean was coming down the hill which was 466, now 46, and that Turnipseed was making a left turn off of 46 to go to Tulare because he was a student at Cal Poly and he was going home for the weekend, and it appeared to the witnesses that Turnipseed did not see Dean because the color of the car was a silver gray color, and it blended in with the background because it was getting close to dusk, and they just collided.
I guess they've reconfigured it since then, correct?
It's been re-engineered, and I don't know what their accident frequency is today, but I don't imagine it would be very much because I've driven that road many times, and it looks like a pretty safe intersection.
In both of your professional opinions, and you were the investigators on the site, why did James Dean die? Let's ask you that.
Well, I blame it on the no lights. Now the new cars now, just like we've got an 03 Buick, you turn you drive, you have lights on it all the time.
So they did a blood alcohol test on Dean's body and
No alcohol.
no alcohol. Now I've heard reports that there wasn't enough blood left in his body. I mean, is that another urban legend?
That's a bunch of baloney because he didn't bleed that much.
So they could have gotten a
Oh, certainly, yeah, because he had a minimal amount of injuries on his face or the rest of his body that would trigger a lot of blood flowing. It just wasn't that much.
I thought his face you know, except for a bruise on his head there that has looked fairly natural.
Well, if you didn't look at his neck and everything, I thought he had a broken neck, and he had some abrasions about him, but nothing that looked really bad.
Now, you had mentioned something about you thought that he might have actually even collided with the car. His head might have hit the car.
I think his head came in contact with the right front fender of Turnipseed's car.
And that would be because he was trying to get around the car and it would have collided. Oh, okay. Was that car street legal? It was a race car. Was it legal to actually drive that car on a public highway back then?
Well, it had all the things that the car is supposed to have. It had a horn and windshield wipers and bumpers and engine and muffler and everything else. So it was street legal as far as we could determine.
You already said that you didn't think there was speeding on Dean's.
No, I went to, took a speed kid class after that. And even at the time, 45 feet after point of impact and 15 feet for Turnipseed. You know, that's no 90 miles an hour. If he'd been going 90 miles an hour, I don't think there'd been anything left of the car or even the mechanic that was with him.
And the car was pretty mangled, but it was...
Oh yes, it only traveled 45 feet.
Now, Dean's passenger, Ralph Viderich,
yes.
Viderich, he was thrown from the car, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, when you arrived at the crash scene, was he already in the ambulance?
No, they were loading Dean first, and then they're putting Viderich in, and I didn't have occasion to talk to him at the scene, nor to Dean.
So you didn't speak to either of them. You did speak to Viderich later, correct?
Later, I spoke with him at the hospital, yes.
Okay.
But Dean was DOA at the Paso Robles Hospital, dead on arrival, and had been taken to the mortuary by the time I got there, because it was sometime before either Ron or I could leave the scene, because he had to get the scene cleaned up first. So it took a little while. In fact, the dispatcher had gotten word that there was James Dean in the accident. And the only way I know that he found that out is because that night, the Paso Robles High School football team was playing the Bakersfield High School football team. And the two men that owned the Paso Robles radio station came through the accident scene shortly after it happened, and they found out that it was Dean, and they called it into their network so they could get credits for it and all, I guess, which the news media does. Anyhow, once the news media got hold of it, everybody knew. And we kept getting calls from our dispatcher asking when we were going to be 1098 at the scene, which means completed at the scene. And this never happened at accidents. They let us finish our job at the accident, and then if they had traffic for us on the radio, they would call us later. But they called me several times, and then I said, I'll let you know when I'm through here, but I'm not through yet. Well, when I finally did get the chance to talk to the dispatcher, he said that he had been bombarded with calls, and the hospital had been bombarded with calls. Everybody wanted to know something, but they weren't talking because neither Ron nor I had arrived at the hospital. We were still out at the scene. Unbeknownst to us at the time, the ambulance had an accident on the way to the hospital.
Yeah, you were telling me about that.
It was a minor accident. It was a head-on sideswipe, just a couple of miles from the accident scene, but we neither one knew about that till we got into the hospital.
So Dean and Viderich are in the
ambulance that has an accident with another car.
So the ambulance has another accident.
Yeah, right. But it didn't. They just exchanged names, and phone numbers, addresses, and all. So it didn't delay them too long. So he was able to get going again to the hospital. And when he did get to the hospital, they told us this later, that every phone was ringing off the hook, because they wanted, the news media wanted more information on it, but they didn't have anything to tell them because they didn't know anything. So it fell on our shoulders to notify, and we still didn't know too much about Dean other than what they could tell us there. So I went over to talk to the doctor and asked him if he'd gotten anything out of the Vita rig, because Dean had been transferred to the mortuary already. And he says, no, I just can't seem to get anything out of him. I don't know. Maybe it's because he's from Germany. He's from the Porsche factory, and maybe he doesn't speak English. I says, okay. So I went over to talk to him, and I spoke with him in English. No response at all. So then I speak German. So I speak German. Yes. So I spoke to him in German, and boy, his eyes popped open right now. He was very receptive to my voice.
What did he say to you?
Well, just that they had an accident, and he didn't know too much about it, because, of course, he couldn't talk much. He was in a state of shock, you know, with the broken jaw and everything else. We couldn't talk too much. So I didn't want to push it, you know, with him being in an injured condition. And then I went down to the mortuary to get some information on Dean, driver's license information and so forth. And fortunately, the owner of the mortuary's wife had just read an article on James Dean in the Saturday Evening Post. So she filled me in on his whole life practically, so I learned a great deal, because I didn't know who he was. I thought it was James Dean, the sausage maker, you know.
That's what I thought.
Is that right? Yeah. So you didn't know?
I'd never heard of him. He only made 3 films. He had just finished filming Giant, and the studios, to my understanding, we found out later, had taken away his driver's license because he was considered a wild driver. And so they had taken away his driver's license. He'd just gotten it back because they had just finished filming.
I guess you're about the best looking gal we've seen around here in a long time, I think. Prettiest than I think I've seen down here.
Well, thank you, Jen.
There are so many stories that have started with that accident. Even in our local newspaper several years ago, they were talking about the fiery crash of James Dean's vehicle. There wasn't a spark in the whole thing, let alone a fiery crash. And you hear all kinds of stories.
You were the main investigators. Do you know if there were other investigators from the police departments or any other agencies that worked on this?
Well, first of all, nobody had jurisdiction but the Highway Patrol, and I don't know of any city police department that would come out there in the wide open spaces and try to have an investigation unless there was something that we had done wrong and possibly one of their people had been involved. But I have heard of no investigation other than some of these private agencies have gone out on their own and done what they could, you know.
Something that's related to where we are back in Newhall, there was a Tips was a restaurant down there at the time. There was a waitress who said that James Dean and Rolf Wiederick stopped in that day on the way up. And she claimed later that some investigators came back and asked the Tips crew if they served Dean alcohol that day. Did you ever hear anything about that?
Never. We always, in the county, I think it's probably done statewide, maybe even nationwide, they run a blood alcohol test on all fatalities, and there was no sign of any alcohol. The district attorney who would do any prosecution in this case said that there was insufficient evidence, they thought, to prosecute Turnipseed, the other driver, for her violation of right-of-way, and they couldn't prosecute Dean because he was deceased. So they decided to have the coroner's inquest, and of course we had to both testify, and the coroner's jury came back with an open verdict, which indicates it was probably a case of both of them being to blame, and they decided not to prosecute. And they asked me if it was okay with me, and I said, sure, I'm not going to argue that. And it didn't stop there. It kept on going. for months, and then it kept on going for years until about after 50 years it started to die down.
We've come to the end of our tale today at the site of the end of James Dean's life, but as you've all seen today, the story will never be completely told. I think we learned some new things today and maybe busted a few myths. We want to thank everybody that helped us with this production today, and especially the Jack Ranch Cafe. So from Show Lamb, California, this is E.J. Stevens saying thank you for joining us.